So my name is Kamau Bobb. I am the Senior Director of the Constellation Center for Equity in Computing. It's a new effort at Georgia Tech to put bring our thoughts to what equity in computing actually means. It's one of these challenges in the country where we're trying to get computing education to all students. It's born out of the Obama administration's CS for All, Computer Science for All, to make sure that everybody has access. The For All clause is really important in that, because primarily Black and Hispanic students, poor students of all kinds, don't have access to that kind of education. And Georgia Tech is one of the leading institutions in computer science in the country. So it was time for us to make a statement about what equity means in that space. I think the main problem for Black and Hispanic students and underserved students across the country in obtaining computer science and STEM degrees is basically that they're coming out of school systems that don't have the infrastructure to help them get access to higher education in those skills. So the central problem there, computer science is kind of new. It's a new field, it's something that's necessary at the moment. In higher education STEM fields, you need computational skills to be able to do anything. If you want to be a computational physicist or a computational biologist, you still need to have some kind of computing skills. It doesn't necessarily mean that you want to be a computer scientist per se. But even there, in order to get into higher education where you want to do anything related to STEM skills, I think one of the fundamental problems still is mathematics. Students need to be able to do math well. So what you end up having is that we're trying to promote computer science education for the purposes of giving students access to the kinds of workforce opportunities that they need in the current environment. But in order to do that, they're still coming out of school systems where the mathematics is weak. And oftentimes what happens is that the weakness begins at algebra. And algebra still is one of the primary courses that determines students' trajectory and their ability to study anything STEM related in higher ed. Part of what we end up seeing at the National Science Foundation is that we have to be able to make the case for what it is that school districts need. Because in many cases, you'll find that the schools that serve our students, that serve Black and Hispanic students and rural students and students of color, wherever they may be, is that they're being held accountable, especially in urban centers, they're being held accountable to math, English language arts, and social studies. Those are the standardized tests. So school districts and school leaders have to make sure that the students perform in those subjects. Otherwise, the schools will be taken over. So if we're coming at them and saying, well, you need to do computer science, they don't have an incentive as a structure. They don't have an incentive to pursue that. Because in order for them to keep the lights on, they have to do math, English language arts, social studies. So one of the things that we're doing at the National Science Foundation is to try to build a research agenda where we can integrate the computing into the mathematics, so that we can say to the school district, the school leader, the teacher, that if you do this computing in this particular math course, not only will you introduce students to computing, but you'll increase their performance in math, which is the thing that you're measured against. We also need to be concerned about where they go to school. Just saying that students are going to college is not enough. And I bristle at the argument that for communities where you might be first generation, you can just say, well, it's okay for you to go to college. It doesn't matter what kind of college you go to. Just because you're going to college is better than you would have done or that your parents have done. That sets the bar low. That says that because of your background, we're not gonna have you aspire to the most elite schools, to the most competitive schools. And I think that kind of expectation, that low expectation, is another part of the problem that damages our ability to get into these kinds of fields in ways that are meaningful. And you see that play out when you think about the for-profit private schools and how they are predatory. They're going after our communities. They have signs, they send out recruiters, they go to our schools. But those same schools don't send people to upper middle class white communities. They just don't. They don't advertise on the buses that go into their neighborhoods. They don't advertise on the street corners, on the trains. So there's a totally different system. And implicit behind that is when you are coming from a first generation condition, or the expectation of your college is relatively low, that we can just kind of offer you just enough and say that therefore we've done something for you. And while that's good, it's not enough. And I think fundamentally it's unethical. The choices that students make about college most certainly makes a difference. if you think about the choice that athletes make on what team they go to, that makes a difference too. So to expect that it wouldn't make a difference for students going to college is kind of silly. If you think about the computing space, the STEM education space, there's a whole spectrum of the kinds of opportunities that will befall you depending on the kind of college that you go to. So right now, the most public arguments about diversity and inclusion in STEM fields, diversity and inclusion in the tech workforce, most of them come from the big popular tech companies, Google, Microsoft, Intel, PayPal, Salesforce, Best Buy. We hear of all those names. But if you want to work in those companies, Amazon is another one that's kind of shaking up the landscape at the moment with the HQ2. There are 20 cities that are all vying for them to be present. If you want to work in those companies and have a job as a senior technologist, as a senior engineer, or in the engineering track where the work that you're doing is fundamentally technical, you have to go to an elite school. That's the way it works. That's the way it works with leading law firms. They hire people from the top 5 law schools. You would expect that people from the top 10, the top 15 tech companies hire people from the top 5, the top 10 schools. So to suggest that just going to college is itself a good thing, of course it is. But going to the kind of school that gives you access to the kinds of skills that you need to be viable in this workforce at the higher end, or even to have the trajectory to get into the higher end, the choice of college makes a difference. Well, I think STEM education is important. I think we need to reflect on the fact that it's not a word, it's an acronym. Science, technology, engineering, mathematics. I think in the common discourse it's kind of become this word that you can just let me go get a STEM, as if they offer STEM degrees. They don't. So it's important because the way that the global economy currently works and the knowledge-based economy, you basically need technical skills of some kind. Not necessarily super technical skills, but you need basic technical skills pretty much to do anything. And because of that, it becomes a very important part of the opportunity framework for all communities to be able to access meaningful occupations and professions. So to the extent that you can use STEM education as a platform for moving one community from one level of the socioeconomic strata to the next, it becomes meaningful and important in that way. And that's especially true for people for whom poverty has just been a trap. So the reason that we started off this discussion about the for all clause in the CS for all narrative is because the for all part is important. The way that privilege works in the United States and around the world is that privilege begets privilege. So if you're born with a lot, you pretty much get a lot. And if you're born with nothing, you get nothing. Atlanta is one of the most income unequal cities in America. It has the lowest rates of social mobility in the country. So if you're born poor in Atlanta, for example, the likelihood is you're going to die poor. And what is it that will enable you to not have that be your fate at birth? One is a sound education. Two is a sound STEM education, where the opportunities for climbing up the ladder are a little bit more meaningful. So to the extent that STEM education is important, it's important for those reasons. It's important for moving big swaths of the American population from one ranking in the socioeconomic strata to the next. Those are all cultural artifacts, but they rest on somebody's technical ability to make it happen. So when you are technically sound and you have a STEM background, however it may play out for you, it enables you to engage in the fabric of the country in ways that you might not otherwise be able to. So again, to that extent, it's important for professional safety, for the ability to climb out of poverty, and also for the ability to contribute to the fabric of the way the culture and the country works. For those three things, I think STEM education, bearing in mind that it's science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and computing, are important.